ultimately dictated by energy balance. Consuming a high sugar bolus can also elevate your blood pressure, which we know is a risk factor for neurodegeneration. We've seen that one high sugar bolus, about 75 grams of sugar, can cause your systolic blood pressure to elevate for 2 hours post-ingestion, which is no bueno. We've also seen that a high sugar bolus can reduce testosterone by about 25%, which also persists for 2 hours. Yeah.
Why?
Well, all of the above. But as I mentioned, in that study where they saw a 25% reduction in testosterone, they used a 75-gram sugar bolus, right? As I mentioned, your average adult today consumes 77 grams of added sugar every single day. So they're consuming that every day. So yeah, the added sugar thing, I think, is it's a problem. Now, again, if you have a big calorie budget, if you're a bodybuilder, if you're if you're burning an intense amount of calories on a daily basis, you do have a discretionary caloric budget. But for your average person, again, today your average person is overweight, bordering on obesity, has some component of metabolic illness, glucose dysregulation. I would say that being a sleuth and being able to identify added sugar and then cut that out, or at least minimize your consumption of it, I think you'd be doing your health major favors.
So one more.
Water and fat, right? But the fat doesn't stay at the top, right?
Does it have some sugar in there?
There is lactose. Yeah, there is a natural source of. It is a natural source of sugar, but it's not like oil and water, right? The fat globules are suspended in the solution of essentially 95% water, which is what milk is, right? The triglycerides in dairy are bound by a lipoprotein, essentially. Like, you've heard of lipoproteins like your LDL cholesterol. Milk is comprised of lipoproteins called milk fat globule membrane. And these globules are comprised of proteins like sphingomyelin, which is an important structural component of myelin, right? The myelin sheath in our brains. It's comprised of phosphatidylcholine. So I think that actually there's a lot of good stuff to be had in full-fat dairy. And it also, these globules in milk affect the way our bodies respond to them. So dairy is unique among fat-containing foods in that it's got a higher proportion of saturated fat than any other food. So if you look at any natural fat-containing food...
steak?
Yeah, steak is actually a proportion of saturated fat. And yet, paradoxically, we see that people who consume full-fat dairy tend to have better cardiovascular health, better metabolic health. And I think it's due to the presence of this milk-fat globule membrane. So my hypothesis is that it's really good for brain health if you can tolerate dairy. So a lot of people... And when you churn cream, you disrupt the milk-fat globule membrane. So this is one of the reasons why if you melt butter and you put it in some water, it floats to the top. So that globule membrane has been disrupted. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see in clinical studies that when you feed people either cream or butter, they both start out as cream, right? I mean, cream is cream, obviously, but butter starts out as cream. Butter seems to have an adverse effect on blood lipids, whereas cream doesn't. So it's the presence of this like milk-fat globule membrane that I think makes the fat in full-fat dairy very healthy. But its disruption, I think, is what can lead to a sort of adverse lipid response in some to butter.
When you say an